So I sent you the Joshua reading. We'll also have one other reading from Ezra 3, but I can pull it up on the screen, I think. So you just have to bear with me.
Yep.
But this is session 3. There's intro and then 1. And so I guess it's like 2/3. And what we're going to be talking about tonight is, if I can get it to click through. Why is it not? Oh, there we go. Okay. Family is the theme. And we'll be talking about this line, you are to name him X. And we'll talk about why it's Joshua, why it's important. And through that, we'll also be talking about military dependence, as in spouses and dependent children, as well as how the good news depends on military. And that's kind of going to lead into next week as well. So I'm sure you've heard this phrase, say his name or say her name. I think that's important. Names convey meaning and dignity. So it's important that we address people in a way that recalls the meaning given their lives by those who love them. When we call God's son Jesus, a lot of scriptural meaning is lost because that's not actually his name. In Matthew and Luke, readers discover that Mary will bear a son despite not having had sex with her partner, Joseph. In Matthew, it's an angel of the Lord who tells Joseph. But in Luke, the angel Gabriel, whose name evokes martial imagery, speaks directly to Mary. The child's specified name is directly linked to what he will do, which is sozo, to save in Greek. It will not be a Greek name because, as members of Galilean peasantry, Mary and Joseph only speak Aramaic, a Semitic language related to Hebrew. In the interest of evangelizing Gentiles, however, the authors of the New Testament assign Greek letters to sound out his Hebrew name, Jesus. The name that they would have heard on the lips of the angel was Yehoshua, because he will yasa his people from their sins. And that's important. He will save, he will yasa his people from their sins. So where do we get that line? Lord, baby Jesus, save us. I thought that was the actual line from Talladega Nights. It's not, but I tried to get it close. Why is sozo important? Sozo and yasa are the same verbs used in Judges 2:16 and 18 to describe the expectation placed upon judges after Israel possessed the promised land. In 16, then the Lord raised up judges who yasa them out of the hand of those who plundered them. And in verse 18, whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and the Lord yasa them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. Remember, last week I talked about how in order to understand soldiers, we have to understand the political entity and its structure. And instead of kings, I'll make this point a little bit more directly later, but kings are not Israel's top of the pyramid. Judges are. But that's not all. Remember our friend Gideon, who was asked to rule over, or masal, Israel after the military victory against Midian. His story is filled with references to God and Gideon acting in tandem to yasa Israel from the hand of the Midianites. And when God approaches Gideon, God says, mighty one, and he talks about how he's going to yasa, save Israel with Gideon's help. It ends with verse 8:22, a verse we covered last session in detail. The men of Israel said to Gideon, masal us, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon, of course, says, no, I'm not going to do it. That's God's job, not mine. But there's even more, and I'll bring us back to Mary and Joseph. In Judges 13, there's a line that sounds eerily like the Annunciation. An unnamed woman, the wife of Manoah, receives her own visit from an angel of the Lord. Remember in Matthew? Here's what she's told in verse 5. Behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. Do you know who we're talking about?
No.
All right, it's Samson.
Oh, yeah.
He's not the ideal prefiguration of the Messiah, but it's hard to argue with Scripture. Here are a few keywords in the Greek Septuagint, which will bring us back to the Gospel of Matthew. In Greek, the Greek Septuagint, we have the oldest manuscripts we have are in Greek. The Hebrew Old Testament, we only have manuscripts that date back to like the 1100s. And so there's this, if you really want to get technical, Greek and Hebrew are kind of in tension. They were speaking and writing in Hebrew, but the largest collection we have is in Greek. And in Greek, and the evangelists were probably referencing the Greek Septuagint because the Hellenizing influence was such that it also was about recording your history in written form and distributing it. So that's another reason why Greek is so credible / popular. In Greek, Judges 13:5 says, "Behold, you shall conceive in tikto weos, and he shall begin to sozo ho Israel from the hand of the Philistines." And in Matthew 1:21, Mary will tikto weos, and you shall call his name Jesus. We'll say Jesus for now. That's not really his name. For he will sozo ho laos, the people from their sins. And laos is where we get laity from. Laikos is laity. It's like everybody, la-di-da-di, everybody. Is that a coincidence? No. Is Jesus another Samson? Not really. But as the one who saves, Yasa, he serves as an Israelite judge. His name, Yehoshua, was common in the first century. It happens all over the place. Jesus this, Jesus that, which is really Joshua. In the Bible itself, however, I can only find a few with that name. I count just 4, beginning with 2 really minor characters, one from Samuel and another from Kings. In Kings, there's a bunch of cities that are being named. It's not really sure which city or region that this Joshua is the governor of, but it might have been Jerusalem. The other 2 are unique in that their ancestry is frequently, if not always, well, the second one, frequently tied to their ancestry. They're the Joshua, son of yada, yada, yada. The first was actually born Hoshea, the son of Nun. His name means salvation, the noun form of Yasa. Now look at these Hebrew words in reverse order. One character is added at a time from salvation, Yasa, or Yasa, the noun form, to the proper name, Hoshea, and finally the theonym, Yah or Jah is added, which Moses adds to his name in Numbers 13:16. And so this is how we get this name. Joshua is an elongated theophoric name from Hoshea, which is the name form of the noun, which means to save. As if by design, God gives themselves, Yahweh, the name that God gives themselves, shares 3 of the same consonants as Yehoshua, the first 3. It's almost like it was meant to be. So Joshua is never said to masal, to rule over, at least not Joshua the son of Nun. But he does save Yasa just once in chapter 10.
Mm-hmm.
And notice that Joshua is sought out. Gibeon, in case your memory or your Bible nerdship isn't the best, Gibeon goes to Israel after they've heard all these victories that they've had. Primary amongst them are Sihon and Og, which preemptively strike Israel, and they are defeated, just like Ukraine. Russia attacked Ukraine. And so Gibeon's like, oh gosh, we don't want to do that. Let's pretend to be water bearers, and we'll go ask for their protection. And Israel, under Joshua, says, okay, we'll do that. And so now Gibeon is being attacked by these 5 kings, and Israel is bound by their covenant, their promise, their contract with Gibeon. And so they do. And these 5 kings, over and over and over, mentioning this kingship, they are defeated. And it goes on, they hunt them down and they cut their heads off, which is a little gory. But the one thing in Joshua, in verse 6, It's the same thing that the kings were conspiring to do. They go to some of these other kings and they say, come up to us and help us, blah, 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 blah. But the Gibeonites add something. They say, don't just come up to us quickly and help us, but also save us, yasa us. And this is I think the only time when save or salvation occurs in reference to Joshua. Do you want to pause here and reflect or ask questions, or did you notice anything else in the text?
No, not at this point.
All right. Am I going too fast, or is it a fire hose?
Oh, you're going fast. Yeah.
All right. Well, we can slow down and let me know if there's something that you're kind of curious about or didn't quite catch.
Okay. Well, it might be helpful for me, maybe others too, to tell me where you're going.
Sure.
Give me a sketch of the game plan. I don't have any context at this moment with where you're moving to, except the word family.
Yeah, so the name, we open with this promise, the Annunciation to Mary. You will bear a son and you will name him. So I'm going over naming because Matthew wants to bring that out. And as we see in Judges 13, it's not word for word, but it's pretty close.
Okay.
So what is it that the angel Gabriel, whose name Gebar, also gives us Gibor, mighty, prevails, strength. This, which I think is Michael is usually thought of as the warrior angel, but Gabriel's name draws upon this military imagery even more. Gebar, Gibor, and then we get later into the priesthood. We'll talk about Gadol, which is not the same, but it's highest, greatest. And so there are all these military threads that are beneath the surface that we usually talk about. When we talk about, well, Jesus' name is Joshua, in my experience, that usually brings up Messianic Jews who want to really build up the relationship between Israel and Paul's mission to the Gentiles, which is fine. I think there's an even more important reason that his name is Yeshua and Joshua, and not just because I'll mention this, Yesos, the Greek, that is the exact same name of the 6th book of the Bible. At some point, as Greek entered the Bible, Greek New Testament entered into the English language, someone was like, well, no, I don't like Yesos. Let's call him something else. And it goes into Latin, which is Yesu. And then from Yesu, we get Jesu, and then we add an S, and it's Jesus, and it's no, we already have a name. It's Joshua. So when in Matthew, Mary is told about she's going to conceive the Son of God, right? His name is mentioned as part of that for a reason. And as I was going through this, it's not just Joshua. Oh yeah, Joshua is a really popular name. The only two that mention the son of are this first, the son of Nun, and we're about to get into the son of Josadak or Jehozadak, which is important for another reason. So if you feel comfortable, I'll keep going because I'm going to talk about the military aspect of it and how the one son of Nun and son of Josadak are interesting in that they draw upon these two very important aspects, the political and the priestly, and the political is not kingship.
Okay. I'm good.
All right. Okay, so the Bible goes out of the way to point out that Joshua is not in charge. He's simply a conduit for God's promise to the people. Back before their military campaign began in Canaan, the chain of command was firmly established, and Joshua was not at the top of it. Joshua 5, verses 13 through 14, right before they're getting ready to engage in battle against Jericho, the wilderness time is over, they're going to take the promised land after waiting all this time. And the reason they didn't take the promised land before was they were afraid of the Nephilim, the big people who had strong fortifications, blah, blah, blah. So military violence, military victory is precisely what kept them out of the promised land and wandering for 40 years. Now they're coming at it again, and right before they're going to cross the Jordan and begin this campaign in Jericho, this is the scene that the book of Joshua sets up. When Yehoshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing there with his drawn sword in his hand. And Yehoshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries, Sar?" And he said, the angel said, "No, but I am Sar Saba Yehovah. I am the head of the hosts of Yehovah, of God, of Yahweh." The word, and this, I just added this like an hour ago because I think it's crazy how close some of these words are. The word here, used here, adversary, Sar, sounds a lot like another Hebrew word, so much that I think it merits closer attention. Joshua asked the angels, "Are you with us or with our Sar?" Those who are against us, our antagonizers. The root, sarar, is actually an adjective instead of a verb. Most primitive roots are verbs, and then you get nouns from that. This one's actually an adjective, something like antagonistic. And antagonistic gives us antagonist, our enemies or adversaries. It's a character trait rather than an actual character. It can also mean restrictive or constraining. Those who constrain us, those who restrict us, like Pharaoh restricting them from going out and sacrificing in the desert back when they were in Egypt. Elsewhere in Torah, the word for chief, elder, or heads of houses or clans is also Sar. It's often translated as prince, captain, or noble. It is not the same as masal. Its root, sarar, appears just 5 times in the Old Testament. It carries a decidedly more negative connotation, like when the newly freed Hebrews complain of Moses in Numbers 16:13, saying, "Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey," which we think is Egypt, and we've been promised this milk and honey in this land we've never been to. "Is it a small thing that you've brought us up out of this land that we know, to kill us in the wilderness, that you must also make yourself sarar over us, prince over us?" And so the sarar here in Numbers 16:13, it takes a qualifier, al-sarar, to rule over. Masal requires no such prefix. Masal inherently assumes leadership. The difference between Rada Masal and the Sarar word group is like the difference between subleasing with someone you know and answering to an absentee landlord, a landlord who rules over you. And the Masal Rada word group, it incorporates into it over. So like over, when you read it in some of these keyword studies, Masal means rule over, all of it, rule over, right? Sarar has to take, it's not ruling, it's ruling in and of itself, ruling for the sake of ruling. So it takes this prefix in Hebrew, al-sarar. Are you ruling over us? Are you ruling us, or are you ruling over us? Masal doesn't need that extra crap because it assumes that the leader is a part of us. There's no over us. It's just like you are ordering us, you are ruling us, you are here with us, like subleasing with someone. Like you're underneath them, their name is on the lease, but they're there with you. In contrast to Sar and Sarar, which is antagonizing, it's a negative connotation, it's like an absentee landlord. They control all, they have power, and they have no relationship. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's funny because when you hear some of these concerns over like class warfare, there is an inherent class tension in human societies. And I think one of the ways that Israel is doing this is saying, our heads, our captains, they might be our adversaries, they might restrict us, they might bind us. And yet there's this kernel of goodness that's slightly different that I've traced from Radah in Genesis, to Masal through Judges. Is that making sense?
Starting to.
Okay, so let's head back to Joshua, who, as
Okay.
far as I can tell, is never referred to as a sar or sarar in any of these meanings. Instead, he's referred to repeatedly as Moses' assistant. 4 times, he's referred to as Sarat Moshe, translated in the ESV as Moses' servant, or in the King James Version as assistant. Assistant in the ESV. But of the nearly 100 times this word, Sarat, appears in the Old Testament, it is most often rendered minister, like priest or clergy. Remember when I said only 2 Joshuas were referred to as a son of, and that one of them is the military commander, the son of Nun that we've been talking about. He's the first. So let's turn to the second, Joshua, son of. In this case, it's Jehozadak, or Jozadak for short. Joshua, son of Jozadak, is one of the most underappreciated characters in the Old Testament, whose influence far outweighs the attention that he usually gets. But I think it's important. Of the 4 Joshuas, he's one of only 2 that's referred to as repeatedly Joshua, son of, where ancestry and lineage is emphasized. He does not appear anywhere in Samuel, Kings, or Chronicles, as far as I can tell, only the prophetic literature in Haggai 1 and 2, Ezra 3, and Zechariah 6. Joshua of Jozadak is a child when Cyrus of Persia ends the Babylonian exile in 538 BCE. And Cyrus institutes a very different political system. Rather than hoarding power and ruling with an iron fist, like Babylon did, and Assyria, Cyrus, who is called Messiah in Isaiah 45:1, he's a popular ruler. He rules through peace from afar. He returns the Israelites to Jerusalem and provides funds to rebuild the temple that Solomon built. So in Cyrus's political system, he would prefer that everybody get their bread in circuses, right? And he's going to help you do that. And all you need to do is pay tribute, and we rule with a soft, with a soft touch. And you might not like it, that's fine, but like compared to what they had, the Israelites love this. That's why he's referred to in such glowing terms. So when they come back, all the exiles return that's the last bit of exile. So now they're going to remain in the land basically until the Romans. When they return, Joshua comes back. He becomes the high priest, and he is accompanied by Zerubbabel, an ancestor of Jesus's. He's made the governor of Yehud Medinata, the province of Judea, or Judah, under the Persian Empire. So Zerubbabel, the governor, is very often referred to in tandem with Joshua, son of Jozadak, the high priest. So priest and governor. And governor is the ancestor of Jesus. Joshua is not, but that Joshua, son of, really makes me think. Joshua, the son of Jozadak, is the greatest or highest priest. That's why I say the minister supreme. I'm looking forward to the Doctor Strange movie. I'm a Marvel fan, but you can think of the greatest or supreme whatever way you like. He's always mentioned with Zerubbabel in Haggai. Turning to Ezra 3, where he's referred to as Jeshua. So essentially what happened, so that the southern tribes were only gone about the length of a lifetime. The northern tribes were carried off earlier. They're referred to as lost, and we'll talk about them actually next week. And so when it says at the end that some people had actually seen the first house, the first temple, they're recalling it with their own eyes, right? And I actually just noticed this emphasis on Judah in terms of the tribes. Judah and Levi were the 2 tribes that were brought up. Now, if you are addicted to reading the Bible like I am, you will notice that filled in this passage is filled with like hyperlinks to other times in Israel's past.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they're reenacting these high points in their own history. The ingathering, where they gathered as one man, and they celebrated the festival of booths, which is Sukkot. which is also known as the ingathering. That comes from Exodus 23 and 34 and Numbers 29. The free will offering, that was the first building of the tabernacle when everybody came together and gave their free will offering to make the gold and the silver and the purple and everything else from Exodus 35 and 36. In Ezra, it says the cedar trees from Lebanon, but that evokes the cedar trees of Lebanon, not only from 1 Kings 5 that Solomon used to build the temple, the first temple, which was complicated because there was like slave labor involved and everything else. But the tabernacle, at least, that was all free will offering. The other cedar trees of Lebanon will call up Judges 9, which we talked about. I don't think we read in depth, but there's this wonderful parable that talks about, the trees holding sway over another, and it mentions the cedars of Lebanon, which are these, if you think of like the sequoia forest in California, it's something like that in the Israelite imagination. And then the phrase from 20 years old and upward, that comes right out of Numbers 1, verse 3 and 45, which names the age of an able-bodied person when they can join the Sabah Milchama, the assembly for war. Symbols and the instructions of King David evokes 1 Chronicles 15, when David brings the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle into Jerusalem, and he's like dancing naked, and he's like, I'm going to make myself a fool over and over again. There's also trumpets, which also were involved in 1 Chronicles 15, but also in Jericho, the Battle of Jericho in Joshua 6, where they blow their shofars, and then they let out a great shout in Joshua 6, 5, verse 5 and verse 20. So it's basically what I call a liturgasm, where it's like all this liturgical stuff, and we're like reenacting, everybody's excited, they're weeping, they're crying out, they're like mourning because like the old house is destroyed, but like it's like this flurry of emotions and liturgy. And they're reenacting these high points in their own history. And all throughout this is Joshua, son of Jozadak, who in Zechariah, which we'll get to in just a moment, becomes something more than a priest. The prophet Zechariah even goes a step further, and Zerubbabel takes a back seat, except for Zechariah 5. And Joshua, the high priest, is seen in a vision as one who will rule or govern. It is not Masal, it's Din, which is slightly different, though we do see Samar, keeper or protector, and the noun form of Abad, both from Genesis 2:15. As the minister king, Joshua will fulfill humanity's primary task of serving and protecting. And so I actually think this is an incredibly important passage for the entire Bible. This man, whose name is Yehoshua, son of Jozadak, Joshua, son of, is going to be repeating. He's the high priest. He shares a name with the military guy, but that's not as important. And there's this, so I should explain, there's this thing, I'll talk about it later, but there's three offices, three roles that theologians talk about Jesus fulfilling: prophet, priest, and king. And I think king is a mistake, but we'll talk about that later. Prophet could be anybody. Anybody could be called on by God to speak for God. Priest, however, was hereditary. It was always Levites. And more specifically, it was from the house of Aaron. Aaron was the high priest, and there are all these other priests, the Girgashites, the Kebushites, and something else. So the house of Aaron is actually the most important because that's the high priest. When you hear Aaron, Israelites think high priesthood. And that is very distinct, this threefold office, the munus triplex. One is not supposed to be the other, right? King David had his prophet Nathan, and then they also had the high priest over there. They are not supposed to mix. But Zechariah mixes them deliberately, knowingly, with this person, Joshua, son of Jozadak, the high minister, the high priest. And so he becomes this amalgamation of priest and king. And he's not a prophet, but Zechariah is, and he's having this vision. So it's like mixing up these things that we're not supposed to mix up. And I think it's actually really, really important. So let's take a step back and I'll recap. in their native tongue, Joshua and Mary are told to name their son Yehoshua, which in every other context is anglicized as Joshua. In Greek, Joshua is Jesus. It's the exact same name of the sixth book of the Bible, of the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint. In the Hebrew scriptures, just two of these all four Joshuas conspicuously assume the suffix son of. Joshua, son of. So let's talk about these sons as this family, right? The son of Nun was the first military leader of Israel who oversaw the reception and distribution of the promised land. Big deal, right? They're receiving and occupying the Holy Land. And the person who brings them to that, his name is Yehoshua, who saves. And he happens to be from the tribe of Ephraim. I was just curious, so I looked it up. The son of Josadak was the first high priest after their return to the promised land from exile, who rebuilt the holy temple. This leaves the third Joshua, the son of God. So let's talk more directly about the Holy Family. As the son of God, a man of war, according to Exodus 15:3, Jesus Christos is a military brat, a military dependent. His dad is a warrior, making Mary, Jesus' only biological parent, a military spouse. Spouse-dependent military families are central to the story of God and salvation history. In fact, when Jesus teaches in the synagogue, his neighbors refer to him as Yehos Maria, the son of Mary, not the son of Joseph. With her relative Elizabeth, her blood relative, Syngenes, Mary is referred to as a daughter of Aaron, making her, both of them, a member of the priestly tribe of Levi. And where does that leave Joseph? As Jesus' adoptive father, no genetic material passes between the two, meaning Jesus is not technically a member of the royal tribe of Judah. Now, sure, somewhere back in all the genealogies, there might have been, I'm sure, tribes married one another. That was not prohibited. But the way the story is set up, Jesus is inheriting the Davidic bloodline in name only. The blood he inherits is directly from the line of Aaron, the high priesthood. Judah it's complicated. That's why I have this dashed line. So why is this important? There's this theological term I mentioned earlier, munus triplex, the threefold office of Christ, consisting of prophet, priest, and king. The problem is, kingship is a foreign concept to Israel. It has no real foundation in Genesis or any of the rest of Israel's mythic origin story. In the Bible, kings are born in the bloody self-interest of Abimelech. And when the people demand to be like the nations, God tells Samuel, his prophet, that they have rejected Yahweh as their king. Here is what God tells Samuel to warn the people that kings would do. From 1 Samuel 8, verses 11 through 17. These will be the way of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. Because a king is going to rule from the back, right? Absentee landlord. And that's in the military. Lieutenants might be at the front or near the front, but it's grunts first. And the king will appoint for himself commanders, sar, of thousands and sars of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be pure perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his sars and his abeds, his officers and his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. Jesus is not a king. He does not do the thing that the Bible says that kings do. David is a rare exception to the rule of rulers, who more often than not do evil in the sight of the Lord. So this is an infographic I technically plagiarized, but I improved upon it. If you look for it, you might find it. But this is this has all the kings from Saul onward until they're exiled either to Babylon or Assyria. 4 out of the 43 rulers, 4 did good in the sight of the Lord. 4, that is a tenth, right? 5 had mixed reviews on, Rotten Monarchs or whatever website you rate rulers on. And the rest all did evil in the sight of the Lord. This is the heritage of kingship. Jesus is not a king. Here's the thing, though. God made a promise to David, and God keeps God's promises. Royalty is therefore applied to Jesus on a technicality. He is Joseph's son in loving relationship, and I don't want to downplay that. Joseph raised the Son of God. That is good, but he's not blood. When God chose Mary to carry God's son, she was a package deal. She was already betrothed to Joseph, of the house of David and the tribe of Judah. Mary was God's elect, but so was her husband. And for this reason, not for royalty, but for David, in not passing Judaic blood, Judahite blood, royal blood, to Jesus, there's a very important difference between what he is and what David was. Even at its best, the best king we can imagine, it's not really what Jesus is about. Family is more than mere blood, but we must also be clear-eyed about our ancestry, about whose story we bear and whose blood we receive. In Genesis, we are called the youngest of the many generations of all creation. Jesus' generations are important to Matthew and Luke, and that's why I think his name is significant, not just for the salvation it implies, but for the story that it bears. Jesus' name should be Joshua. That was the established English form of Yehoshua. When we say his name, it is meant to evoke 2 very important Joshua son ofs who precede him. The son of Nun was a military leader, an Ephraimite. The son of Josadak built the second temple, and before Herod's expansion, it could very well have been called Joshua's temple. And that would put an interesting spin on Christ's remarks in John 2, verse 19 through 21. Yehoshua answered them, "Destroy this temple built by Yehoshua, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews, who didn't know what the hell they were talking about, said, "It's taken 46 years to build this temple, and you'll raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. And I say the Jews didn't know what they were talking about because the Jews only saw Herod's work as the temple. They didn't care that the second temple was built hundreds of years earlier with the Zechariah and the Cyrus and blah, 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 blah. Like, how is the history only what's right in front of your face? The Jews thought it took 46 years to build this temple. No, that was the development work that Herod did. That's not the temple. So we shouldn't overlook the fact that Yehoshua ben Elohim completes this triune name, one which binds together the story of salvation born of the 12 tribes of Israel.